can't imagine anybody more suited to be honored with LDF's National Equal Justice Award than Bryan Stevenson.
Bryan is a warrior for justice in the tradition of Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton and the great iconic names who are the pillars of the civil rights movement.
I'm a product of the LDF mission. I'm a product of Brown versus Board of Education. And it was lawyers I identified by the Legal Defense Fund that came into my community in the 1960s and opened up the public schools.
Bryan Stevenson's work is more important today than ever.
This is a critical moment in American history. I think we're in the midst of a very, very serious identity crisis. We are wrestling with what kind of nation we're going to be. Are we going to be a nation that just accepts the legacy of slavery and lynching and segregation and tolerates a quantum of bigotry and discrimination that always will burden and menace communities of color? Or are we going to be a nation that resolves to overcome the legacy of slavery and lynching and segregation?
Who wants to think about those who are sentenced to life in prison without parole? Who wants to think about those who were lynched by the thousands in our country? These are the people that Bryan compels us to think about. And he insists on the humanity of them and that we recognize that humanity.
The work of the Legal Defense Fund, the work of civil rights lawyers and activists all over this country has never been more urgent than it is today. The Bureau of Justice predicts that 1 in 3 Black male babies born in this country is expected to go to jail or prison. And that is a crisis in the African-American community. We've got 13 states with no minimum age for trying a child as an adult. I've represented 9 and 10-year-old kids who are facing 50, 60 years in prison. We've condemned thousands of children to life imprisonment without parole, mostly Black and brown kids. The Equal Justice Initiative was born in response to this crisis.
We have a system of justice in this country that treats you much better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes.
What Bryan does is something very powerful, and that is that he invites us. In fact, he calls on us. In fact, he demands of us that we too become proximate, as he says, to the struggles of those who are most in need.
Today, we still live in a country where Black and brown people are presumed dangerous and guilty, and that burden weighs on us, and the narrative has to change. That's why we're building this museum. That's why we're building a monument, a memorial, to help us reflect on this history. We need to find ways to embrace these challenges, these problems, the suffering, because ultimately our humanity depends on everyone's humanity.
The idea that a great memorial to the scourge of lynching could be built in Montgomery, Alabama. It was his singular vision and his singular determination that has brought forth a memorial that is among the most transformational and profound memorials built in this country since the Lincoln Memorial.
You start with them at eye level, and then on this corridor, they begin to rise. And then you get to this corridor, and this is when you begin to confront the scale of all of these lynchings. Whoa. Truth and reconciliation are sequential. You can't have reconciliation until you first have truth. We've practiced silence. We don't remember. And without memory, we are vulnerable to repeat the problems over and over again.
We have to stay hopeful. These are times when it's easy to become hopeless about what's possible, and you have to fight against hopelessness. I believe that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. We've got to be willing to do inconvenient and uncomfortable things. The world changes, justice rises when good people are willing to do the inconvenient and uncomfortable. And it's hard. It's very hard.
I always think of Bryan as calling us to be more. Not just to do more, but to be more.
To my brother, Bryan Stevenson, congratulations on this great honor. You and the inimitable Sherilyn Ifill deserve each other for your greatness, your courage, and your pursuit of justice for all.